You're wasting everyone's time, Janet. The lawyers already reviewed it, Glenn snapped, tapping his microphone with the same smug finger he probably used to sign away common sense. The room laughed. Not a roaring laugh, more like a ripple of polite chuckles from people too spineless to check the damn file themselves. I was still holding it. A dull olive binder. Section tabs frayed from actual use, not design. Inside, on page 62, was the parcel map. The one with a sliver of land that didn't belong to the city. The one I had circled in red ink, twice. But nobody opened the binder. Nobody ever did. Now, you probably think I stormed out or gave some righteous speech about ethics and procedure. I didn't. I closed the binder quietly, walked out even quieter. That was a Thursday. On Friday morning, I paid $7 to the recorder's office and filed a provisional claim under Form 14A, Stewardship of Transitional Municipal Land. You don't need to know what that means. Glenn sure didn't, but he would. Before we go further, quick pause. If you're listening and stories like this make your day just a little more satisfying, go ahead and hit that subscribe button and like the video. 97% of folks listen without subscribing, and it really helps the team keep digging up these twisted gems. All right, back to the mayor and his bulldozers. See, Glenn was the kind of man who thought silence meant submission, that if you weren't loud, you weren't powerful. But I'd spent almost 2 decades learning exactly where things went, not just in filing cabinets, but in law. Ordinances don't care about charisma. Land doesn't care about campaign slogans. And that sliver, that half-acre triangle he called a margin error, it sat right in the dead center of his flashy development renderings. No easement, no annexation, no official claim, just dead ink. A gray space no one noticed. Except me. I had flagged it twice. Once in the project's pre-clearance memo and again during the zoning roll-up. Both times it was brushed off. Glenn's people said things like, just a survey anomaly, and we'll smooth it out, which is consultant speak for ignore it and pray. They didn't realize that old municipal buffer zones like that were governed by a decades-old statute no one had repealed, mostly because no one remembered it existed. I only knew about it because it was in a dusty binder I scanned during a thunderstorm power outage 7 years ago. I'd made a sticky note. Dead space? Live trap? Glenn's team wanted groundbreaking by spring. That meant rushing everything. Permits, inspections, media tours, probably bribing someone for early equipment delivery. I kept doing my job. I filed paperwork. I logged entries. I clipped notices to the bulletin board no one read. But every action I took was logged, timed, and followed state protocol. So when that triangle of dirt became a thorn in their $56 million foot, I had already been its caretaker for 89 days. On the 91st, my claim matured. On the 92nd, they printed commemorative shovels. And on the 93rd, their contractor ran a title sweep. It's funny, the panic that sets in when the word clouded title starts floating through legal emails. They call it a quiet defect in law, but it was anything but quiet behind closed doors. Planning started pinging me for record logs. Legal asked me to confirm archive times. I didn't say much. I just directed them to the public filing system. Line 42, I'd say. Check line 42. It was always there, had been for months. It even had my initials. Glenn didn't call me right away. His deputy did. Then the planning commissioner. Then legal. Then, finally, the mayor himself. His voice cracked like someone who just realized their car was missing a steering wheel and the cliff edge was closer than expected. Janet, you need to fix this. Right now, he barked. I warned you, I said, not unkindly. Twice. Then I hung up. I didn't slam it. Just set the phone down gently like a gavel. It started as a hiccup in the survey overlay. I was reviewing parcel maps for a zoning update. One of those late-night reviews no one else bothers with unless the word lawsuit gets tossed around. I'd seen the grid 100 times before, but this time something tugged at me. A little triangle, half an acre wedged between 2 lots like a forgotten puzzle piece. No parcel number, no recorded easement, no annexation deed. Just nothing. It was like the land had never formally joined the party. Ghost acreage. I clicked through the GIS layers again, just to be sure. Still nothing. I pulled up the oldest microfiche scans we had, some of them from the 70s, and even those were inconsistent. One showed it as a buffer zone, another labeled it TML Transitional Municipal Land, but it had no assigned jurisdiction. That alone should have kicked off a multi-departmental panic. Instead, it got me silence. I wrote it up in a standard inter-office memo, not dramatic, just a subject line. Unincorporated buffer zone, parcel irregularity adjacent to Sector B. Attached the map, flagged it in yellow. I included 2 statute references and a highlighted section of a 1986 city ordinance that implied the parcel had never been formally absorbed. Sent it off to legal, CC'd the deputy director of urban planning. Waited. Nothing. 3 days later, I followed up in person with the deputy. He didn't even look up from his sandwich. "It's a margin error, Janet," he said, mouth half full. "Survey teams fudge shapes all the time. Not worth clogging the pipe." "It's not a shape error. It's unclaimed land," I replied, holding out the printout again. He waved it away. "We'll bulldoze around it if we have to." The arrogance in that one sentence was almost impressive, like eminent domain was some magical broom they could just sweep under anything. They treated land like it was concept art, bendable, ignorable. But land is stupidly literal. It either belongs to someone or it doesn't. And if it doesn't, the law doesn't just shrug and move on. I thought about pushing harder, but I'd played this game before. Being right too early in government is the same as being wrong. It just makes people defensive. So I nodded, said understood, and returned to my desk. That's when I dug out the dusty black binder labeled Transitional Stewardship Clauses, statewide exceptions. I kept it buried on the second shelf behind the broken hole puncher no one touched. Inside, on page 214, was Clause 11B. It was the kind of thing only a clerk with no life and too much curiosity would find compelling. Provisional title rights for unclaimed municipal buffer zones. It allowed any state resident to claim transitional land for stewardship if left unopposed for 90 consecutive days after proper filing. The kind of legal relic you'd think had been repealed with the dinosaurs, but nope. Still active, just never used. Because no one ever noticed the land. But I had. And here's where people always ask, why not report it again? Go higher. Because I knew Glenn. He didn't want questions, he wanted headlines, he didn't trust old systems, only new consultants with iPads and buzzwords. And frankly, I didn't feel like being humiliated in a staff meeting just to watch them ignore me again. I didn't want to be another voice in the room they tuned out. I wanted to be the wall they hit at full speed. So I waited, filed nothing. Said nothing. Just watched them plow forward, hiring PR firms, teasing renderings to the paper, tweeting about the future of industry. I clipped each headline, stapled them to my private copy of the claim form. The more noise they made, the more valuable the silence became. And that triangle, it kept sitting there, just dirt and weeds. But legally speaking, that triangle was a time bomb, and it was counting down. I should have known the moment Glenn asked to clarify a concern during a public city council meeting that I was about to be turned into a punchline. He stood there, hair gelled within an inch of its life, custom-tailored suit snug across his beer gut bravado, pretending to leaf through the agenda packet, like it was spontaneous, like the whole thing wasn't choreographed down to the snide inflection in his voice. "Before we move to voting, I just want to flag something hilarious," he said, holding up my memo like it was the punchline to a joke nobody asked for. "Our very own clerk, Janet Trowbridge, who, by the way, does an excellent job filing stamps and paper clips, has raised an urgent legal issue regarding a strip of grass behind the utilities shed." Laughter. He flipped the page and read in a faux dramatic tone, "Unincorporated transitional buffer zone may present legal encumbrance. Recommend review before title transfer." Then he paused, let the room settle, and with a smirk that could sharpen glass added, "Janet here thinks $7 and a form can stop $56 million of progress." More laughter. Not from everyone, but enough to make the air feel small. I didn't blink, didn't frown, just gently closed my binder and stood up. Someone in the second row tried to hand me a tissue like I'd been crying. I wasn't. I was thinking about page 214 in the black binder. Clause 11B, the one they never read. The one I had quietly confirmed was still enforceable. I walked out before the cameras finished panning. I knew they'd clip it later and edit my departure like some kind of emotional storm off. Let them. Drama made better headlines than quiet competence ever did. I didn't go home right away. I went to the annex office. It was already dark out, and the lights inside the recorder's desk flickered with the sad glow of underfunding. I filled out Form 14A by hand. Slow and neat. Every box mattered. Under claimant type, I checked resident steward. Under property description, I attached the GIS parcel printout and referenced the map number. The clerk behind the counter, Brenda, a kind soul who'd been stuck in this job longer than me, didn't even ask questions. She just nodded, took my form, stapled the receipt to the back, and said, "Weird parcel, huh?" "Just forgotten," I said. The total came to $7 even. Exact change. "Anything else, hon?" I shook my head. "Just the timestamp." She flipped the paper over and stamped it in red ink. 8:41 p.m., Wednesday. That time would matter later, a lot more than anyone realized. Walking back to my car, I didn't feel victorious. I felt tired, not from what I'd done, but from knowing how predictable they were, how little they respected silence unless it came from a man in a tie. I didn't want revenge. I wanted accuracy, ownership. And that's exactly what I had now. Conditional, legal, boring as hell stewardship of a half-acre triangle no one could name. The next morning, the mayor's office sent out a press release announcing groundbreaking in 4 weeks. Contractors booked. Ribbon ordered. The whole charade moving forward like nothing stood in its way. They were wrong. Because that little triangle, the one no one wanted to see, it saw them coming. And now, it had my name on it. It started with a missed call from planning, then 2 voicemails from legal, both within 20 minutes. When I saw the names, I didn't even press play. I knew what it was. 2 weeks out from their grand tech corridor launch, and they'd finally gotten around to doing the thing they should have done 3 months ago, run a full title check. Normally, title clearance is routine, just a line item buried under contractor deadlines. But not when there's a buffer parcel with no clean chain of custody, not when the system spits back a name that doesn't match the city's holdings, and definitely not when that name is mine. At 9:46 a.m., the first email landed. Subject: Urgent. Parcel 324 TML ownership discrepancy. From one of the junior analysts in records. Poor guy sounded like he'd seen a ghost. He pasted a screenshot of the title report summary. Registered steward, J. Trowbridge. I replied with 5 words. Refer to line 42 statute log. A minute later, another ping from planning. Clarify your claim? Glenn needs an answer before press call. I replied again. Refer to line 42, system documentation is complete. They didn't like that. The next call came from legal's deputy director herself. She didn't even say hello, just launched into it. There's a mistake on the title search. Did you enter something manually? I leaned back in my chair, looked out the window like I had all the time in the world. No, I said. I filed it properly. 93 days ago. System accepted it. Statute supports it. See line 42. Silence on her end. Then, like she'd swallowed a lemon, clause 11B? That's the one. The calls started dominoing after that. Legal rang up planning. Planning looped in GIS. Someone in IT double-checked the date logs and found my time-stamped filing. Clean, verified, sequential. Not a single thing out of order. Brenda's little red stamp now glowed like a stoplight in the system. The contractor's insurance team followed next, because they couldn't issue coverage on a site without a clean title. At 1:17 p.m., Glenn himself left me a voicemail. His voice was calmer than I expected, like someone trying real hard not to scream. Janet, I just got word there's been a hiccup in the corridor footprint. Apparently your name's showing up on something. I'm sure it's a miscommunication. Can you please give me a call back? I didn't. Instead, I forwarded him the filing receipt and highlighted one sentence from my original memo. Parcel 324 may be subject to transitional claim under Clause 11B. Recommend preemptive stewardship action or challenge prior to final permitting. I knew no one had clicked it. I knew because the system tracks that. Every user ID, every timestamp. That clause had sat dormant, highlighted, blinking, untouched. Until now. They tried to spin it as a glitch. Then they asked if I'd be willing to sign a corrective affidavit. I told them no affidavit was necessary. The system wasn't broken. The law wasn't broken. What was broken was their assumption that silence meant absence. Behind closed doors, the walls were starting to buckle. The contractor refused to schedule delivery for ground prep. One of the consultants walked out of a meeting and drove back to Chicago. The Planning Commission called an emergency private session, but forgot their Zoom room wasn't muted. I overheard someone mutter, "Why the hell didn't anyone read her memo?" By day's end, Glenn's senior aide emailed the full team a single line. "This needs to go away quietly." They still thought it was about noise. It wasn't. It was about law. And law doesn't care how loudly you want something to disappear. It only cares what's written. And mine was written in black ink, filed properly and glowing red in every internal document they opened. By now, every time they typed the parcel number into the system, my name came up. And no matter how many lawyers they threw at it, one fact stood tall. The city didn't own the land. I did. They kept trying to build their castle on sand and call it bedrock. 2 days after the title flag, Glenn's project manager sent out a mass directive. Proceed as planned. Delay is not an option. Engineers were told to keep to schedule. Contractors told to show up like nothing was wrong. Temporary fencing was installed. Dig permits rushed. Someone even marked utility lines in blue spray paint across the buffer zone, like a performance for the cameras that hadn't even arrived yet. But it didn't matter how many bulldozers they rented, because the title insurer refused to underwrite. No clear title, no coverage, they wrote. One sentence. Absolute. No gray area. And without coverage, no contractor in their right mind was about to put a single dollar of equipment on the ground, let alone break soil. That's when Glenn finally called. Not his aide, not a staffer. Him, on my personal cell. I didn't give him that number. He pulled it from the city directory, which meant someone was panicking. I answered on the second ring. He didn't waste time. "Janet, I'm going to need you to resolve this issue." No hello, no how are you. Just pure irritation, barely smoothed over by faux diplomacy. "I already did," I said. His pause stretched a little too long. "I'm not sure what that means." "It means I warned you. Twice. You dismissed both memos. I followed procedure. I filed legally. The title reflects reality." "You're a clerk," he snapped. "Not a lawyer." "That's why I used your lawyer's manual," I replied evenly. Silence. Then a sharp breath. Then the line went dead. I stood there for a moment, phone still in hand, not because I expected him to call back, but because I knew that somewhere in that moment the power dynamic had shifted, not in some dramatic coup, not with yelling or protest, just a quiet, surgical pivot. They thought their momentum would flatten everything, that press releases and big names could erase oversight. But bureaucracy, when weaponized correctly, doesn't shout. It just waits, like a tripwire in tall grass. Within hours, legal's office was scrambling. I could see it in the metadata of our internal systems. Document after document pulled, reviewed, resaved. Clause 11B searched 17 times, old memos reopened, user logs exploding with activity. Someone tried to push a retroactive filing on the parcel. It bounced back, automatically rejected. The system had locked stewardship due to elapsed opposition window. 93 days. No contest. Irrevocable. One of their paralegals called records and asked if there was a workaround. Brenda, bless her, just read the policy out loud with the calm of a woman who had watched too many men scramble too late. They tried contacting the state office to challenge the filing on procedural ambiguity. State office responded with a boilerplate reply, "Title confirmed. Statute active. No errors found." Even their emergency outside counsel couldn't find a crack. I knew they wouldn't. I'd followed their exact manual step by step, line by line. The very binder they ignored had become the fence around their ambition. But this was the part they hadn't anticipated. I wasn't angry. That's what made it worse. I wasn't suing. I wasn't on social media. I wasn't leaking to the press. I was just sitting at my desk, clocking in, eating my yogurt, answering only the questions I was legally required to. I gave them no noise, no target. Just a calm, impenetrable wall of documented fact. Their rage had nowhere to go. Glenn had built his empire on spectacle, ribbon cuttings, drone flyovers, hashtags, and vision boards. But now, with millions on the line, all of it rested on one triangle of transitional land they forgot to check, and a clerk they forgot to listen to. That's how the blockade started, not with protest, but with a single, silent word in the system: claimed. The emergency meeting wasn't supposed to include me. I only found out because one of the planning interns forwarded me the wrong invite, calendar link and all. I didn't join, obviously. I just watched the participant list populate from my desk. City Legal, Glenn, the full planning board, outside counsel from some firm in Chicago with a name that sounded like a country club, the kind of people you bring in when your usual spin stops working. They were in there for over 2 hours. Video off, mics off, total lockdown. But digital silence has a smell when you've worked in admin long enough. I could see it in the update patterns. Files being pulled, cross-referenced. Search terms like Clause 11B, transitional land override, provisional title defect. Some poor soul even opened a document tagged dead policy, do not use from 2004. At 2:08 p.m., someone triggered the full log on my filing. That's when I knew it was over. They were trying to see if I'd slipped, but I hadn't. Everything was clean, filed within state guidance, all supporting documents attached, publicly logged, and now officially over the 90-day threshold. That number must have hit like a hammer when the outside counsel read it aloud. Clause 11B is not complicated. It's dry, sure, but not vague. It says any resident may file a stewardship claim on unincorporated municipal buffer land. If the claim goes unchallenged for 90 consecutive days, it locks automatically. Not as a suggestion, as law. Mine locked at 93. And here's the real kicker. The burden to oppose it had been on the city, which they failed. Twice. Once when I flagged it, and again when I filed it. The clause didn't require me to advertise it or shout from rooftops, just to follow the process, which I had, to the letter. The first sign that things had gone terminal was when Glenn's office issued a meeting summary with no action items. That never happens. Then legal sent a vague memo about clarifying stewardship roles for pending parcels, as if they were suddenly discovering land stewardship for the first time. One of the council members, probably trying to save face, called me and casually asked if I might consider rescinding my claim for Project Harmony. I told her calmly, I'd be happy to discuss terms when the mayor is ready. That was the real moment Glenn began to unravel, because now he had to make a decision he wasn't built for: fight and risk exposure, or fold and hand over power. Suing me would mean opening discovery. Discovery would mean emails, meeting logs, memos ignored, that council meeting footage. All the points where I had done exactly what I was supposed to, and they hadn't. And Glenn's team? They'd built their campaign on no red tape. They couldn't be seen losing to a civil servant who used the red tape better than they did. His silence wasn't strength anymore. It was evidence. They tried drafting a revocation notice, legal spitballed language like clerical overstep and filing ambiguity. But the system wouldn't let them upload it, not without triggering an audit flag. The minute they filed an override request, it would go to state for arbitration. And arbitration would mean someone from Sacramento pulling up timestamps. Brenda's stamp. My memos. My note on the public bulletin board no one ever read. They didn't want transparency. They wanted control. But control had a deadline. And they missed it. Now the mayor's team had a half-acre hole in the middle of their launch site and a paper trail shaped like my name. Clause 11B doesn't care who's in office. It only cares who's paying attention. And for 93 days I had. They thought they could buy their way out. The envelope landed on my desk late in the afternoon, hand-delivered by someone from Glenn's executive staff who couldn't meet my eye. Inside was a typed letter on thick, cream-colored paper and a pre-filled form titled Voluntary Claim Rescission, Parcel 324 TML. Tucked in behind it was a note card, handwritten in someone else's script, calling the offer a gesture of institutional appreciation for my dedicated service, and suggesting the retirement bonus attached was a sign of mutual goodwill. The check was for $4,000, $4,000. That's what they thought my silence was worth. That's what they put on the table in exchange for unraveling 93 days of legality, timing, and intent. a bribe wrapped in a thank you card. I slid the check back in the envelope, sealed it, and walked it to the mailroom with a note stapled to the front. Declined. Please recycle. That night, I typed up my own agreement. 2 pages, no legalese, just terms. The city of Fairgrove shall retain usage rights to parcel 324 TML under a 99-year lease at the rate of $1 per year, due annually by January 1st. The parcel shall not be sold, transferred, or renamed under any future municipal action without written consent from the current registered steward. The parcel's publicly accessible area shall be designated Dale Commons. Simple, precise, no drama, just law, behaving the way law is supposed to. The next morning, I sent it by certified mail to both Glenn's office and the city's outside council. I didn't wait for a reply. I already knew the timing. The press event was 4 days out. Every local news outlet had RSVP'd. Drone permits filed, portable stages rented, contractors scheduled. The headline was already written. Mayor O'Connell breaks ground on the future. And I held the shovel. They called an emergency meeting 2 hours later. This time I was invited. It was the first time I'd ever sat at that table, across from Glenn, in the same mahogany-trimmed room where he'd once mocked me in front of cameras. He didn't look smug this time. He looked like a man who realized the foundation under his spotlight was crumbling. He cleared his throat. This naming request, He stopped short of insulting it. Is that really necessary? It's not a request, I said, folding my hands. It's a condition. One of his advisors leaned in. Could we at least negotiate the duration? 99 years is excessive. It's the statute's maximum term, and you've already used 93 of those days pretending it didn't matter. They tried to argue that naming public spaces had to go through council. I pulled out the form from 2007 that granted the mayor's office naming discretion for non-memorial green zones, signed by Glenn's predecessor, still in effect. More silence. This is extortion, Glenn muttered. No, I said quietly. This is administration. They had a choice, agree to the terms and proceed, or cancel the event and explain to the press why their flagship development was dead in the water over a half-acre of dirt they never legally secured. By the end of the meeting, the city's legal counsel stood, adjusted her glasses, and said to no one in particular, "We recommend acceptance." Glenn didn't shake my hand. He didn't have to. The moment the final copy of the agreement slid across the table, signed and notarized, I stood up, nodded, and left the room. Behind me, a man who loved being loud was being drowned by the sound of his own silence. They'd planned a ceremony. They were still going to have one. Only now, the cameras would be standing on Dale Commons. The sky was cloudless that morning, one of those obnoxiously perfect days where every camera angle sparkles and the sun makes everybody sweat, just enough to look busy. Glenn had done his usual strut down the rollout carpet, handshakes and back pats for every man with a clipboard and a camera. They'd even flown in a local news anchor to MC. She was doing her peppy voice into a mic while a drone buzzed overhead, catching aerial shots of a field that still hadn't seen a single shovel break dirt. I stood way off to the side, behind the temporary fencing near the permit board. No name tag, no introduction. Just a clipboard in my hands and a copy of the signed agreement tucked into the side pouch of my canvas tote. It still smelled like toner. Glenn stepped up to the podium, flanked by 2 city council members and a state rep who clearly had no idea what was about to happen. He beamed as he launched into his speech about progress, vision, the future of Fairgrove. He made it to sentence 5, something about unlocking innovation for generations, when the murmurs started. It wasn't loud, just one contractor, headset on, walking briskly across the grass toward the soundboard tech. He whispered something, gestured behind the bulldozer. The tech paused, then nodded. Glenn kept talking. Another whisper. This time, a woman from planning, clipboard clutched like a shield, came jogging toward the stage. She didn't even go for Glenn directly. She went to the press coordinator first. A document folder passed hands. That was when the change hit Glenn's face. Not shock, not anger, just that particular kind of politician white where all the blood drains out and the smile freezes in place. He looked down at the paper, looked back up, then took one slow step back from the mic. The cameras kept rolling, unsure what was happening. One of the contractors raised his hand toward the bulldozer driver and gave a horizontal wave. The engine dropped to idle, the exhaust cloud puffing once before going still. The stage lights flickered. The ribbon on the stand swayed gently in the breeze. I watched Glenn lean toward his PR chief and mutter something. She immediately pulled out her phone and gave the cameraman a sharp nod. The live feed was cut. No transition, no music, just dead screen. He stepped off the stage a minute later, not making eye contact with a soul. A reporter tried to approach him. He shook his head and kept walking, his phone out, thumb twitching like he could text his way out of it. The drone, now aimless, circled once, then hovered in place as if unsure where to point itself. The crowd of attendees, donors, contractors, consultants, stood there blinking in the awkward quiet that settles after a magic trick ends with no rabbit. Some tried to pretend it was a planned intermission. Others whispered guesses. But I knew. So did the city planners, still clutching the folder that held my agreement. I didn't need a mic or a podium. My name was already on the ground they stood on. The signage for the site had already gone up the night before. They didn't notice the change until they were taking photos in front of it and someone asked about the new logo. It read, in block letters, Future Home of Dale Commons. And below that, in smaller print, developed in cooperation with local landholder J. Trowbridge. No headlines, no tantrums, no gloating, just quiet, absolute, unshakable. They had every machine, every contract, every ribbon. But the land? The land listened to the paperwork. A week later, buried between a school bond update and a road maintenance reroute, the city issued a formal press release. It was exactly 4 sentences long with 0 adjectives and no exclamation points. No photo ops, no ribbon reattempt. Project realignment finalized with private landholder cooperation, it read. That was it. The rest of the statement was logistical filler. Adjusted build phase, revised access route, estimated 6-month delay. No mention of Clause 11B, no mention of missed deadlines or failed oversight, just cooperation. As if I had strolled in late with a warm pie and said, "Sure, Glenn, use my land. What's 100 years between friends?" They didn't want the public to know they'd been outmaneuvered by a clerk. I understood that. They needed to save face, to keep funders calm, to keep the vision intact. So they did what bureaucracies always do when cornered. They minimized the source of their pain and plastered over it with neutral language. But the land remembered. They installed the sign 3 days later. New font, same name. Only this time, it wasn't buried on the sidelines of a presentation mock-up. It was laser-etched into the brushed steel facing the northeast walking path, tucked just inside the fence line. A few feet beyond that, near a fresh stretch of mulch and a couple of benches, sat a small bronze plaque. It read, "In honor of civic foresight, Curtis Dale Commons. No fanfare, no dedication ceremony, just metal, screwed into stone, right next to the dirt they'd tried to erase me from." I didn't invite anyone to come see it. I didn't bring friends or call the paper. I walked past it one morning before my shift, coffee in hand, and stood there for about 10 seconds. The birds were louder than the construction crew. The bulldozers had moved on to the other side of the property, carefully avoiding my triangle of influence like it was radioactive. No one tried to talk to me that day. Glenn didn't look up when I passed his office. The deputy who once told me it was a margin error now left memos on my desk with Post-its that read, "Thank you," like we were old colleagues. But they knew. Every time someone stepped foot on that parcel, they knew who it belonged to. I didn't take a photo, didn't post about it. My satisfaction didn't come from recognition. It came from knowing that in a world obsessed with volume and headlines, it was silence that had changed the outcome. A forgotten binder, a red ink circle, a $7 filing fee, and the law. Followed not by a committee or a campaign, but by one woman with a quiet desk, a stubborn memory, and a deadline no one else saw ticking. Not Curtis Dale Commons, Janet Trowbridge's land, even if no one ever said it out loud.